Hello, everyone. Just want to let you know you're in the right place. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to get the presentation going in about 1 minute from now. Again, thank you all for joining us. Going to allow another 30 seconds for everyone to get settled in. Okay, an official hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast, Insights from the Field, Workforce Development and the Future of Construction Safety, sponsored by CM Labs. My name is Kevin Drewley. I'm an associate editor with Safety and Health Magazine and a co-host of the magazine's On the Safe Side podcast, and we'll be moderating today's session. Thanks for joining us. In a few minutes, we'll start our presentation, but first let's review some preliminary items. The views of today's speakers and organizations are their own and may not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health Magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not necessarily mean the council or magazine endorses those items. At the end of today's webcast, we'll conduct a question and answer session. To ask a question, simply click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question, and click the send button. Feel free to ask your question at any time during the presentation. You don't have to wait for the question and answer session to begin. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but because of the large number of participants today, we might not get to every question. Any unanswered questions will be forwarded along to today's speakers. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey. We'll let you know more about that after the presentation. This webcast will be archived, so you can access it after today's live event. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, please visit safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Our speakers today are Alan Limoges and Jim Ruhoff. Alan serves as manager of product growth at CM Labs. He brings a background in engineering and a track record of cultivating strategic partnerships, and his approach centers upon a keen understanding of product development and a dedication to advancing industry standards. Jim is training director at Real World Construction Training. He has more than 3 decades of hands-on experience in the construction industry, where his roles have included laborer, foreman, superintendent, project manager, estimator, and small business owner. Jim finds inspiration in helping others grasp new ideas, especially when it leads to safer, smarter, and more efficient work on the job site. Again, we thank you for tuning into this presentation. Alan, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Kevin. I'd just like to get started with a bit of context, okay? So we are obviously talking about workforce development in this webinar, and it's probably something that everyone here has experienced in some way. But I think it's always helpful just to remind ourselves almost like what the situation that the construction industry is in right now. So if you look around, you've probably noticed at your organization it's hard to find qualified candidates. You might get a ton of resumes, but they're not always the highest quality. There's a statistic that's come out recently that 88% of construction companies are struggling to find quality candidates. That's from the AGC, who conducted a survey with their members in 2024. And another kind of interesting statistic that came across my inbox recently was that the construction industry needs to attract over 439,000 workers in 2025 to keep up with demand. So that's kind of ignoring all the people who are retiring. We need a surplus of 439,000 people in the United States in the construction industry if we want to, be able to keep the level of quality and output that, we've been accustomed to. So there's, that might instill a sense of dread in you as you're listening to those numbers. I know companies like Easy Excavating, Jim was sort of in that position too, where he was getting a lot of resumes, but none of them were really what they were looking for. The quality of candidates you're getting, maybe as opposed to 10, 20 years ago are not the same. People aren't growing up on their parents' farm anymore with operating experience already. You're usually getting people now who maybe have played a couple of video games with a tractor in it or an excavator in it, but that's about it. And so we're seeing a real kind of sea change in the industry where we're having to rethink who we're hiring and be a little bit more compassionate to people who are coming in with no like real world skills in the construction industry and helping guide them along the way. So that's where simulators come in. So we're seeing that people are using simulators to kind of speak the youth's language, first of all. So it's an instant connection for them. And I know that Jim has experienced that too, where, you'll have someone in high school, maybe in the early 20s, mid 20s, hop on a simulator and they know what to do right away because it speaks their language. They're used to playing video games. They're used to holding the joystick. They know what to do. It makes it so they're less intimidated by the real piece of equipment, right? So I found a lot of people, especially like in high school, they'll try the simulator and they'll realize, oh, wow, it's actually not so bad. Maybe I can do this. And so we're finding that the simulators are really helping attract kind of the younger crowd. The other thing that people are finding simulators useful for is training in a safe environment. And you can use the machines to make money instead of pulling them aside for training. So I just wanted to give a bit of context. I don't want to get too in the weeds. We have a really great discussion ahead of us today. So before we dive into it, let's ask a couple poll questions. So the first, this will help us kind of understand who we're talking to, and we can actually kind of adjust our conversation based on it. So we're wondering, what is your organization's biggest challenge in developing a skilled workforce? Do you find it's hard to attract new talent? Do you find that upskilling current employees, kind of offering that career path, is tough? Limited training tools. So maybe you know what you want to do, but you feel like you don't have the tools to do it. Is it really expensive for you to train? Or is your training just inconsistent? So some classes might be like really skilled, and then other classes you hear later that, they were causing problems out on the job site. So if you go ahead and answer that poll, we'll take a look, and that would be great. And then we'll give that a couple seconds. I predict, it's going to be attracting new talent. I'm happy to be wrong. But if I had to guess, it's probably that one, given the fact that, like I said, 88% of construction companies are struggling to find, qualified candidates. All right, let's move on to the second poll question. There you go, attracting new talent. It does make a ton of sense. The fun thing is upskilling current employees. It's kind of an underrated, let's say, challenge that people are facing. And it's something that Jim has a lot of experience with. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's dive into the second poll question. So what's the primary way your company currently delivers practical hands-on training? Is it on-field experience? So you just say, okay, go in the excavator for a little bit and I'll watch you. Is it classroom theory? Is it off-site facilities? So you might send someone to a third party, they get training and they come back to you. Do you have them watch like digital, modules, go through modules, watch videos, or is there kind of none of the above? This one, I hesitate to make a prediction, but I don't think it's none of the above. I think a lot of the people, especially if you're here today, you have some sort of training in mind. So I would be surprised if it's none of the above, but we'll see. Let's go ahead and see the results from that. So on-field experience, 70%. That makes sense, right? So 70% of you said on-field experience, only 3% of you said none of the above. So that makes sense. A lot of the customers that we talk to when we're talking about simulation, it's not necessarily convincing them, against any sort of, competitor or anything like that. It's really just trying to explain, well, why do simulators make sense over the real equipment? And it's a totally valid question with a ton of answers, actually. So now I'd like to just get into the conversation, right? So Jim, as Kevin introduced, is an instructor with Easy Excavating, 3 decades of experience. We're really happy to have you here, Jim. And we're really excited to kind of get into a conversation. So before we do that, let's play a little video that'll kind of get the ball rolling for us to really hash it out. Maybe we'll solve the workforce development problem today. Here we go. So you can see just kind of a little visual. This is someone running our wheel loader simulator. They're loading from a bench and they'll be loading a couple dump trucks. So you can see this is kind of a new operator. They're getting used to the controls. They're able to make mistakes on the simulator. And actually, you as an instructor, if you're hiring, you can look at this person's skills and see, maybe they came to you and said, I have 4 years of experience on a wheel loader. You can tell right away whether they're being truthful or not.
Absolutely, you can.
Yeah. And I know you have experience with that, Jim. So That'll lead into my first question to you, Jim. We can end the video a little bit early. Um, for you, clearly you are a CM Labs customer. You had great experiences with the simulator. What was the biggest problem for easy excavating at the time that you bought the simulators?
So like the biggest problem as to why we decided to buy the simulator.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm not going to go into super great detail, but I will say, that we're having a lot of guys retire and we're trying to find replacements for them. And like you mentioned earlier, resumes, we get a bunch, but they don't always have what we're looking for. And oftentimes the ones that we do, they're quite frankly embellished. I think we've all been there where we try and make ourselves look better than what we are, right? But when the time came to put the proof in the pudding, put this guy out there in a position that we hired him for and found out right away that they weren't everything that they claimed they were. Um, Case in point, we hired a guy to run a motor grader and he talked the talk, but he couldn't walk the walk. We put him out in the grader and immediately he ruined a bunch of civil components on the job site as well as damaged the machine. So there was a lot of expense with taking that chance. So that's a pretty good basis for why we needed to find a more inexpensive way to not only vet the guys that we hire, but to maybe upskill and train them along the way.
Right. And that happened to you twice, right? So it's something that happened a couple of times. And I imagine once you find that person, you're all excited. Okay, we found someone to kind of fill that gap. And then you stop kind of looking for new people. Meanwhile, in that time, you've lost kind of like a couple weeks to like a couple months of searching for that right candidate, almost wasting your time with that person that didn't work out.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And again, without going into boring details, at the end of the day, it's expensive. It's an expensive risk. Um, we knew there had to be a better way, and clearly, the sim seemed like something worthwhile to look into, and we looked into it and got one, and I believe that it's doing exactly what we had hoped it could do.
That's fantastic. So to kind of boil it down, when you're in the interview process before you actually hire them, you kind of look over their resume. They'll say they have experience with these machines, and effectively you're saying, okay, jump on the simulator and prove it.
That's exactly it. So in the steps of onboarding a new employee, we have a classroom setting. They have to come and show that they can do what they said they could do on the simulator. And then I also pair that with some build with videos that has concepts and strategies built out. And there's little quizzes that go with that. So immediately if they understand what the video is talking about, it's clear. Oftentimes, if they really don't, they'll say, "Wow, I learned something new I didn't know." And there's little keys along the way that tell you exactly who you hired and what they're capable of, which actually kind of segues into upskill training. So maybe they can run a machine, let's say an excavator, for instance, and they can dig a trench, but maybe they've never had to use the excavator to move pipe around, lift RCP or something like that. You can uptrain that skill on the sim, and then they're ready to go out into the field. They understand the nuances of safety that tie in with it, and the procedures involved with actually lifting and moving, and looking out for dangers, whatever.
No,
So
it's true. And I've heard from friends in the industry, it's kind of like a fake it till you make it. That's how they've sort of made it. So, like on a job site, let's say there's a dozer, they've never operated the dozer, they'll tell their foreman, hey, I know how to run a dozer. Like, I'll run it. Maybe a guy calls in sick or something and there's no one to run the dozer. Um, we've heard a lot of people kind of faking it till they make it. It's not, if you're a company, that's not what you want your employees doing. It's unsafe. And the simulators with that upskilling, as you mentioned, almost provide like a way of illustrating a career path for these operators, right? Because I imagine it can't be very like fulfilling or motivating when, let's say you're an excavator operator and it feels like you'll always just be an excavator operator. The simulators kind of like give you that opportunity to show like a progression, right?
That's exactly it. It it makes it easy. Like if I were to tell you how I learned the old way, basically I show up on a job site, whether I was familiar with it or not, and all of a sudden my card was up, and the foreman would say, "Hey, get in the machine and go dig it, and don't break anything." Okay, so
Yeah.
you hop in the machine, and you're just nervous because you're sure you're going to make a mistake. Everybody's watching. It's expensive mistakes. So it's a real tense learning situation, learning on the fly out in the field. This completely mitigates that. You couple that with some videos that explain the process, the why we do it, how to do it, the nuances and some of the theories, you can absorb that much easier. And in fact, when you look at today's generation of kids that are coming into the industry, a very large percentage of what they learn well is learned via video. You look at today's, platforms and, fancy cell phones that are really just miniature computers and everything. It's a natural flow for them to learn how and what to do prior to being in the real machine. You give them a confidence that they know what's going on around them first, it makes for a successful operator or successful ground guy, helping the operator, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And it's not like, okay, you watch this video and then, next week you apply it. You watch the video and then you can jump on the simulator and apply what you just learned, 5 minutes ago. I think we've all, watched like a documentary or watched something on YouTube where we're like, okay, I'll go do that tomorrow, and then you forget about it, right? So you can actually watch the video and then go do exactly what you learned. So there's kind of like, it reduces all the friction, right?
Correct. It reduces the friction and then sets them up with muscle memory on the controls, which makes them confident in what they're doing right out of the gate. They know
Right.
how to operate a boom and a stick and a bucket before they ever get into the machine. You're setting them up for success instead of hoping that they're successful.
Right. And that confidence is everything, especially when you're just getting started. Because, I mean, at the top of the webinar, I was talking about how we're having to hire more and more green operators, people who have never even, sat in the cabin of heavy equipment before. And so I can imagine that's extremely intimidating if it's your first time. And so the simulators help alleviate that, right? Like, have you seen that in your experience?
Oh, absolutely. It's prevalent, to be honest. You again, it goes back to giving them a confidence in what they're doing. And again, with today's generation of kids coming into the workforce, they grew up around, hand-eye coordination concepts with video games. So they pick this up. It comes to them really quick. They get excited about it, and then they're motivated. And ultimately, they want to learn more. They don't want to just learn one machine. They want to learn them all.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think there's an element of retention too, right? So with the labor shortage, it's not just hiring them, it's actually keeping them around, right? You don't want to hire someone and then they leave 6 months later or a year later. And you are right, like younger people, Gen Z, are trying to look for somewhere where they can build a career, like somewhere where they're not just a number on a spreadsheet, right? And have you found that the simulators help with retention? They help, like say, offer kind of a glimpse of a career progression?
So I think we're seeing that. I think it's probably still too soon to definitively point out a percentage, but I mean, the company I work for, our premise is it's family-owned company. Family comes first. We want to retain you. When we hire you, we want you to be the best you that you can be. And we're going to give you the tools to get there because we firmly believe that that's going to mean that you're going to be a lifetime employee, which is something else that's just really uncommon. You know, a lot of people hop from company to company chasing down that better wage instead of looking out at the long-term picture. And, you know, I think we've got a system now where that's ideally where we're going to keep our guys. They fully understand that we're investing in their future and that they're important. And that can many times have much more weight than a perfect wage, right?
Oh, for sure. I think like there's a statistic, I don't know the exact number, but it's like most people leave a job not necessarily because of wages. It's because of like they don't like their manager, or they feel undervalued, and they feel like their career is stagnating or something like that. And so it's not always just money. It's things like this that help kind of provide like a glimpse of like, okay, we're investing in you. And it feels good to be invested in like as an employee from your employer.
Yeah, yeah. So we're trying really hard to make a system where it's kind of like we give them a better boss, we give them better training, and we give them a better environment to work in. And I firmly believe that those are three keys to keep employees around long term.
That makes sense. And so I was kind of wondering like if we can paint a picture of like a before and after, right? So like maybe before you had the simulator versus now. So before you had the simulator, what was it like to hire someone? Like what was that process like?
So, I mean, I can only tell you from hearsay because I'd never really at this company was involved with the hiring process. But you know, I would say basically in the past, the hiring process was a lot like, you know, throwing a dart at a barn and hoping you hit the side of the wall. You just really never knew where the dart was going to go.
Yeah. And now with the simulator, you're able to be a bit more like precise, a bit more calculated with your decisions.
We can, you know, we like say we needed to hire somebody for our heavy dirt crew, which we just got done hiring 3 guys, right? So we brought them in. I did the onboarding on what they would be doing, what their crews were doing, and taught them really about the machinery that's used on that crew. And number one, it probably expanded our limit of what we were looking for. We can hire somebody that hasn't done it, and we can upskill them immediately in 2 days to the point where they're ready to go out onto that crew. So, you know, it's really kind of open the doors a little bit maybe, and we can kind of pinpoint where we want them to be by the time we get them out there, all in really quick, safe timing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sense.
Yeah, like I think the safe element is something that we haven't touched on yet. It's obviously when you talk about like training people, it's all with that like safety mindedness, right? So the simulators, they have a curriculum of exercises. They kind of start easy, right, with the basic controls exercise, and they get more and more advanced as you go along to do things like you mentioned earlier, like pipe placement, and you're digging trenches near the end, and you're loading trucks. But all with that like safety focus in mind, right? So the curriculum on the simulator has been vetted by people like yourself, Jim, to make sure that the curriculum is teaching you kind of the right operations and making sure that we're building good habits, right? Because I think an important thing to emphasize, at least on my side, is that the simulators are not obviously meant to replace the real machine. It's supposed to reduce the friction between, knowing almost nothing, or, maybe it's been a while since you've operated a certain machine, even if you're an experienced operator, to kind of help give you that confidence, that muscle memory before you get to the real piece of equipment, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. The the simulators really give very good hands-on training, right? Super good at that. You can mimic whatever machine you've got out there in the field. It doesn't matter if you're using CAT controls or ISO, you can mimic that. The muscle memory goes down. You can verbally talk them through the process of the exercise of what they're doing. Super great. But to be fair, that leaves the onus on theory of why we're doing it and the overall, 100-foot elevation view of the project left to the instructor, or in my case, we have a lot of guys go through it. We pair it with the Build Wit videos, and they cover all that aspect. Doesn't have the hands-on, but it explains the how and the why, and what's going to happen if you don't part of the equation. You really can give. I can pull a kid out of high school, run them through a course in a week, and have them ready to go out and understand what's going on a civil project, regardless of what machine he's going to be around.
That's amazing.
Immediately he can go in and do basic operator type scenarios, whether it's just unloading it off a trailer or digging a trench or.
Right. I think that's really important, actually. And I do admire that you teach people kind of even the like broader economics of how the construction industry works, how the business works. Because it's one thing to just say like, okay, we need you to load that truck like 3 seconds faster. So practice on the simulator to shave like 3 seconds off your cycle time, because that's going to save easy excavating, like $10,000 over the course of the year or something like that. That's one thing, right? But it's another thing to explain how, shaving down your cycle time saves the company money. You're better able to like bid on different projects and kind of how the whole system works, right?
Yeah. Well, and you brought up a great point. The simulator is perfect for that, especially when I take video of the operator, showing him what his hands are doing or what his feet are doing. We can tweak that so that he's more efficient. But then, with the drone footage, they can actually watch where they were not doing a good job. Like maybe, they're scooping with the bucket and they're traveling and they're dumping dirt, on in front of them, making it nice and rough, and they got to clean that up, or maybe like on the mini track loader bucket too far and you're dumping dirt on your cab, right? So having the sim right there where you can pause it in mid exercise and say, okay, look, you need to adjust your bucket so you're not dumping while you're traveling. You need to get the bucket down low, but we're digging a perfect trench here, but you really need to be like a 1.5 to 1 slope on the sides or whatever. It's so good. It's like a miraculous training tool because the guys are picking it up. They can see what they're doing.
Right.
A screen right next to them, and you can point out the inefficiencies, and you can also point out what they're doing excellent. So it's a
you want to stay positive.
System. Yeah, and again, it gets back to it excites them when they see they're doing well. They like that.
For sure.
And there's no lag time between, like if we were to go out and do this in a real machine out in the field, well, they got to shut the machine down, put the bucket on the ground so that you can approach them, climb up into the cab and talk to them through the window and say, hey, you're not doing that right, or you're doing a good job.
It's funny because that's what I was going to say. It's like, most, if not all equipment, they don't have room for 2 people in the cab. And so it makes it's something that you don't actually think about until all of a sudden you're like, oh, yeah, that actually makes it really hard to train people on a piece of heavy equipment, because you're either watching from the outside, so you can't even see like how they're reacting. Maybe they're struggling to find a certain button or something like that. You can see maybe where they're looking at the wrong spot. You're missing a lot of that kind of input as an instructor, right? So when you have the simulators, you can not only see like where they're looking, what they're thinking, but you can stop them right then and there, and it creates a learning opportunity, right? So learning opportunities, really, if I kind of simplify it, it's just when someone screws up on the simulator, you can jump in and then they learn from it, right? You want them to make the mistake on the simulator. Have you found that in your experience?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll even take it a step further. Training them on a simulator versus training them out on the job site. I'll tell you right now, I don't know one GC that we've ever worked for that is an advocate for training new people on their job site. They got deadlines. They want to stay within, perfect safe parameters. And in fact, in a lot of cases, the GCs are asking before we ever stop or start on a job site, what are your guys' qualifications, your operators? Do they have certificates? Have they been trained? Your laborers, are they just, rent-a-day laborers, or Do they know what's going on? What kind of certifications do they have? Right. So I guess at the end of the day, even though this is how we all learned back in the day, today you don't want to be caught on a job site by a GC training a newbie. It's an
Right.
uncomfortable conversation. They really don't want that. So
They're holding you to kind of a higher standard than even like 10 years ago.
correct, even 5 years ago.
Right.
So there's a definite improvement here, and a lot of the GCs that we work for often, they're aware of what we're doing. We've invited them into our training center to see. And, I think they appreciate the fact that when we send a crew out to their job site, they really are going to be trained for what they're doing. And
Right.
we can't really do that and behind their back train them on their job site. So,
I imagine it helps to be like on the GC's good side. You want to be in their top, favorite list of contractors.
it goes a long ways. It really does. And we
Yeah.
do see that. So, we're very proud of what we do, and we're very proud of our reputation. And this just strengthens that through and through.
As you should be. And I think it boils down to the objectivity, right? So when you're using a simulator, there's no arguing. Like you either got an 80% because you did this, you dug your trench in this amount of time, you maybe hit like 5 cones. It's not open to really interpretation. So I find that helps, like in situations like yours, for example, where you can send the report to the GC and say, look, John Doe here passed all his, courses with a 90%. He only had one little safety incident, which we taught him about, et cetera, et cetera. And on the other side of that, the trainee can never be like, oh, my instructor hated me. I'm sure y'all had like those friends in high school or something who did bad in a class and they said, well, it's just because, the professor hated me. Well, there's no there's no such thing on a simulator. It's like, no, you just didn't do well because you got a 30% and you hit like 10 cones, right?
You're right. And I mean, we could dig deep into this rabbit hole, but one of the benefits of that is if they fail it at a 60%, they don't get to move on until they do pass it. And we try and make sure that all of our operators are 85% and above. And when they get that and they complete my video training course that goes with that, they get a certificate, right? And that's the ultimate carrot for them. If they get a certificate, that means that they're, top dog on that crew. It's a good thing.
That's really cool.
If they don't pass, if they get a 60%, we have a real conversation on what we got to do to get there. And it might be, slow down, slow is fast. Let's really, figure out what steps we can take on the sim that will improve your operating skill to get you there. And I'll tell you, like right now, one of the hardest courses is with the excavator, picking up the weight and dragging it through the obstacle course with boom, right? That one gets guys every time. And, I'll even have good operators come in and not pass that until they've, tried it 5, 6, 10, even 15 times. And it's a real wake up call from them. I'll admit it. Most guys that sit in the machine tend to get an ego after a while. And
Right.
this is kind of an ego breaker or a reality check to say, there's always something to learn. We can always become more smooth. We can always get better at what we do. So
It's a great
great
mentality.
tool for that. Yeah.
It's a great mentality to have because you can always learn more. Yeah.
For sure.
And I think that the sim too, like you can bring experienced operators, right? So they, like you say, they can have years of experience, but they come in, where we are, it's pretty cold in the winters. And we find that people who work like for the city, for example, they'll go like 6 months without using a certain machine. They might go 6 months without using a grader or a wheel loader. And we've seen instances where they'll use the simulator before like in the spring when it's starting to warm up, they're going to get on that simulator and kind of get the rust off and get ready to get back in those machines for the summer, which I find is a really kind of fun use case.
I can substantiate that. We basically have three types of crews, right? We've got a prep crew, a pipe crew, or a utility division, and a heavy dirt division. And by and large, everybody at some point has been on a different crew than what they typically are on, right? They may be filling in for somebody on vacation or something. But this is a case where, if they want to just knock the rust off and remember how to run a bulldozer, they can come in and do that. And, our superintendents allow for that kind of a scenario where, if you're going to cover for somebody for a while, we can send you in and get you, up to speed, and, we'll re-up the training, and, you'll have a current certificate that says you've been trained to run this for easy excavating when you get out in the field. So, I mean, that's a perfect analogy, and we do that. I've got a guy that's been on a heavy dirt crew, then he's on a prep crew. He's jumped over and helped install water pipes, and he's one of my favorite guys I see in here all the time. He's always wanting to learn more. And how can I jump in and learn what the other guys are doing? The other thing is that tends to help build team camaraderie, right? When I first got here 12 years ago or whatever it was, pipe crew and the dirt crew, they didn't really talk to each other. They didn't like each other. They were always stepping on each other's toes. But having the sim allowed them to kind of see what the other team really is dealing with a no harm, no foul situation where they could come in and, say, hey, I can run that just as good as you can.
That makes sense. I've even seen it at like trade shows where someone in an HR department at a construction company will hop on the simulator, and or even like someone like a fleet manager. They said, I send out these excavators to job sites all the time. I send out these graders, and I've never been in one. And now, after trying the simulator, I realize like just what I'm sending people out to do. It's almost shocking, right? The people after a while, like you say, sometimes you like grow that ego or you lose a bit of like empathy. You're like, oh, laying the pipe in the excavator is harder than digging a trench or something. And then you actually try it and you're like, oh, actually, okay, I see what's going on here.
Yeah, very true. Very
Yeah.
true.
And on the simulators too, like one thing that's interesting as an instructor, I kind of liken them to flight simulators. I feel like most people have heard of flight simulators where the pilot will, before they get their aviation license, they have to learn how to land a plane, with the right engine. You've lost your right engine, now land the plane. um, I liken the simulators, the SimLab simulators, to that, where you can make things go wrong and see how the trainees react, right? So as an instructor, from Intellia instructor, you can make like the hydraulics fail, or you can give them a broken track, you can make it like rain really heavily, you can give them like an empty fuel gauge, and you can see how they react. You can see if they even notice. So I think that's another kind of use case of simulation, where earlier I was talking about like how you want things to go wrong on the simulator because that's where you can learn from it. And so you want people to learn, you want things to go wrong on the simulator. So when they inevitably go wrong in real life, because as we all know, things go wrong in the real world all the time, that they're like, okay, I've seen this before, you know?
Yeah, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Breaking the track on a machine is one of my favorites. And right away they're paying attention within seconds. If they're like, hey, something's wrong, okay, let's shut down the machine and let's hop out of it and walk around and see what we can find, right?
Yeah, and you can tell they're building that muscle memory, because if someone, like say, wasn't paying attention or wasn't accustomed to the feeling of the excavator, even on the motion platform, they might not notice that a track kind of failed, or it might take them a minute rather than like 5 seconds.
Yeah, no, it works.
It's the
Good.
same kind of mentality that we applied to the walk around inspections, right? So you can practice the walk around inspections on the simulator, but the way that we have it set up is that there's something wrong every time, and it's different every time. So
Yeah, yeah.
like if you isn't that have you found that that's pretty like intuitive, and kind of a good, creates those learning opportunities that I was talking about.
For sure. And I'm going to say, like, one of the things we noticed right away with the walk around inspections, if there's multiple possible issues, uh, when you're doing the sim exercise, you're tasked with finding something specific at each step. But my guys are, they're all eyes. They're trying to catch everything wrong while they've got that view of that side of the machine. And
Okay.
it just, it's they're immersing themselves into it. That's a good thing. Before we had, the simulator, one of the hardest things we could convince them to do on a daily basis was the walk around inspections. And,
I
since
bet.
we've got logs that they got to fill out and stuff like that, but those are fakeable. When they have to do it on the sim, they're actually understanding, okay, it's not like track's gonna break, it's broken.
Yeah.
The headlight might be out, no, it's out, and
Yeah. And the thing I've seen too, like I've been lucky to be part of some trainings for heavy equipment. And the one thing that we kept noticing was that the machine that you would, practice your walk around inspection on, you'd be training a class of trainees uh, on the walk around inspection. It would be the same machine that they were going to use like an hour from now to go like dig a trench and start learning. So you kind of already knew that there was nothing wrong with it, right? Because any like quality organization would never let like new trainees operate a machine that there's something wrong with it, right? So I
right,
think that the trainees kind of subliminally knew that there's nothing wrong with it, so they would okay, just check everything. The nice thing about the simulators is that yeah, we make things go wrong on the walk around inspection, so you can't just turn your brain off and just check everything, right? You
correct.
actually have to look, and there's some really subtle things. It's like a broken track is relatively easy to see, but sometimes there's like cracks on the undercarriage or like a leaky kind of hydraulic cylinder that make you
Yeah, or the
really need
drive
to
motor's not in the track.
exactly.
You got to really look close to determine it. Is it seated in? Is it not?
Exactly. And we randomize it every time. So it's not like, oh, I know on the excavator, the track is always broken, right? No, every time you start the exercise, it's a generated, number of things wrong. Sometimes there'll be 5 things wrong. Sometimes there'll be 10 things wrong. Sometimes there'll be, 4, and they'll be different each time. So it's something that we thought a lot about when we were developing the walk around inspection. And I'm really happy to hear that you had a good experience with it.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah. And then I was curious, like Jim, if you how you use the reporting on the simulators. So, at the end of the exercises, the simulator will generate a report and they'll give you a score. It'll kind of show how the trainee did, and it'll give people what we call performance indicators. So it'll take the metrics and it'll give them like an A in productivity, for example, but maybe a C in safety. So that means that they were going really fast, which is great, but they were being careless. So I was wondering like what your experience with the reporting is.
Um, so that really it's a good question, and it changes with the age of the student, right?
Okay.
So, as an example, um, I get a kid from 4-H in a high school setting come in just to check it out as a possible career, right? They're not really interested in the metrics so much. They just want to hurry up and get back on and go. So to them, either it's a pass or a fail. When you
Right.
get some people with experience that are really curious in how to optimize what they're doing, that's where the metrics become really important because they want to know how much fuel did I use? What was my bucket efficiency? How much did I drop on the ground? And they ask, so we'll go through the whole report bit by bit. And, then they've got in the back of their mind what they think they need to do to make that more efficient or um, a better outcome. So the reports are fantastic. Couple that with
That's
the
really
fact that you can print that off and then they can take it home and think about it. A lot of people that are operators tend to think with a mechanical mindset you know, when they're just trying to, decompress or whatever. And they'll think about that, maybe look at their printout and say, okay, I really got to try and remember this for the next time I'm in the machine. So that's helpful too. And I've printed reports off for guys to take home. They come back and they do better. So I know there's a lot of mental prep into that.
right. That makes sense. Because, I mean, we can all improve in certain areas, and certain people have like certain skills and maybe things, blind spots. Like kind of like I mentioned earlier, some people might be really fast, but maybe a little careless. And you can kind of bring everyone towards like a common sort of skill set with the simulator. So you can bring the unsafe people up to a satisfactory level of skill, but maybe you have someone who's really safe, but they're not kind of hitting their cycle times. And you can bring those up to the standard that you're looking for, right?
Yes. Yeah. It allows you to tailor whatever you're doing for training for that particular individual. And, it also, honestly, it gives me clues on video modules that I might assign to them to help them. So then they're getting all types of learning in the audio, the touch and the feel, the visual, tie it all
So
together. And then you're getting a true training where you're using as many senses of your body as you can. It
that's
helps.
really interesting what you just said, because it sounds like using the reporting, you're almost giving like a custom curriculum to some people. So using the reporting, you're seeing that like, okay, this person is a little weak in this area. So you'll have him watch a video, give him a bit of extra attention in that kind of domain, let's say.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. A case in point, I had a guy that, he's on our finish crew, and most of the time he's in a mini skid loader, right? Well, his bucket efficiency is perfect. His grading efficiency is perfect, but his fuel usage is through the roof, and he's super slow time-wise, right? Well, why are you so slow? Well, I'm being perfect with what I'm doing. Yes and no. Time needs to be efficiently used for that efficiency of bucket use to be realized, right? So you can be super, super slow and not drop a speck of dirt in between point A and point B and take 2 years to get there. That's not a moneymaker. No.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think it sounds like it's enabled you as an instructor to kind of get a bit more insight into your trainees, that like it's letting you do your job with like better and kind of in a more like case by case basis, which as we know, everyone learns differently, right? So
Correct.
if you as an instructor can tailor the education to, different types of learning styles, then it will increase people's like retention. It will increase people's like aptitude. People will be more willing to, come to the construction industry if they realize that like no matter, maybe you don't have that mechanical mindset, but you know that like there's still hope for you. I think that that's really great.
Yeah. Yeah. We like
Fantastic.
it.
Fantastic. All right. So I see we're kind of shorter on time. I think we'll open it up to questions. Before we open up to questions and give you a bit of time to type in your questions into the Q&A, I see some have popped up already. We'll run one final video just to close out the conversation. So one last example. This is someone operating a skid steer with forks. So our skid steer has a bucket and forks, and now they're loading pallets onto a trailer, I believe. You can
Yeah,
see
this
her
is
kind
a
of,
4-H student.
yeah. You can see her, she's a little like timid right now. It's funny, you can see her almost learning in real time, right? Like, okay, tilt down does this, then I tilt up.
So full disclosure, that's actually my daughter, and I'm talking her through what she's doing while she's doing it. See her look over to the right. She's looking at me.
Just out of frame.
Yep. So she wanted to learn how to run a skid loader for a 4-H project for mucking out animal stalls in the barn and loading and unloading pallets of grain. And her takeaway with that was, I can run these things just like any guy could. Dad, tell me how much can I make a year? And then now we're off and running. She may do this as a career.
That's amazing. It just takes that one like experience where you're like, oh, it's not as complicated. I remember the first time I was on a simulator, I was pretty nervous, and I'm like, okay, I mean, it's definitely difficult. It's difficult to master, but it does. Sometimes you're like, oh, okay. You see them on the side of the road and you think they're extremely complicated, but you can wrap your head around it. All right, so let's get to the Q&A. So I see a couple questions.
No,
The
excellent.
first,
Great job to you guys, and thanks for sharing your insights and expertise. Before we do start that Q&A, just want to let everybody know there'll be an evaluation survey that we ask you to complete. It'll open in a different screen after the webinar, and we always appreciate your input. It helps us improve our future webcasts. Again, if you want to ask a question, there's that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Type your question and click send. So without further ado, first one asks, are there pre-installed programs that help to evaluate the training session?
Great question. So yes, that's kind of what I was talking about earlier when I said there's a built-in curriculum. So our machines come with pre-installed exercises. The excavator, for example, I think has like 8 or 9 at this point, and they range from easy, so like basic controls where it'll be like, okay, curl your bucket in, curl it out, lift your boom, then drive forward, and then they get more and more complicated where you're loading trucks, you're digging trenches, you're putting pipes into a trench, and it's all like pre-installed. And there is one last scenario called the sandbox scenario. So this is actually the only scenario, every machine has one, where there are no goals. So that actually lets you as an instructor define what you want to do. So basically we make this environment with a lot of random things to do. There's like tires to stack. There's a little area where you can dig a trench. There's trailers to get on and off. And we let the instructors kind of decide their own little scenario. So we have pre-built. And then if you have like some very niche operation that your organization does, we would recommend the sandbox scenario for something like that.
Sandbox is our favorite.
There you
I've got something created for everybody in each one.
go. Right? Like you said, some people are good at maybe some guys good at stacking tires, but bad at loading on trailers, right? So you can have them practice that.
And the system track fuel and emission savings.
Absolutely, right? So we track the fuel burned for every machine. You can actually look at a student and see like the amount of fuel they burned over their lifetime on the simulator. And it's not, for what it's worth, it's not just like some flat rate calculation, for every second you're on it. We put a lot of time and engineering into the, to simulate the engine and the transmission, and all of that factors into the fuel saving. So if you're using the excavator kind of at a low throttle, you're going to burn less fuel than if you're using it at a high throttle. And we do that for all different pieces of equipment. So we put a lot of time and effort to make sure that that number is super accurate. So yes, long way of saying yes, we do track fuel efficiency and fuel usage.
How much time are you spending on the sims with a new person, and are you using this with all new people?
I think that's a good question for Jim. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've actually tailored it based on the crew and the type of work that they do. We have 23 different crews, and we have a mechanic and trucking crew as well. So the question, I'm just going to kind of answer it kind of broad, like for the truck drivers and the mechanics, we feel like they need sim time for very different reasons. The mechanics basically because if they're going to be working on it, they need to know what the hydraulics do, right? So they're going to learn the basic maneuvers of each machine. And I can usually get them through the sim course and the paired video course within a day, right? The mechanics, we go a little bit more into depth with them. They need to know what the hydraulics are doing, obviously, but they also need to know how to fix it. The truck drivers, maybe they don't need to do a walk around, but maybe they should be able to load their own truck if they need to, or load and unload it off of a trailer. So the sim exercises for them, they can probably get done in a half day. Now, let's move on over to like a dirt crew or a pipe crew. I like to try and tailor a course of a minimum of 3 days for them. And it's not just learning the controls of the machine, but knowing what each person's part of the puzzle is, whether you're on the ground or the operator, and all the safety consequences that go with it. The other thing we throw in there, which is obviously a video, is how to read plans, how to understand, how to read a tape measure, right? We do things in tenths. So there's kind of not an easy answer to say how much time I take. I kind of have a goal that I spend. In a slower part of the season, we may go into a little bit deeper depth with that. What's the overall view of the civil project? How does GPS factor into it? And by the way, we didn't talk about it, but we've got GPS capabilities on the sim as well. So I've got a whole course on how to do that as well. So, an operator, he may take 2 more days than just a ground guy, but it's really tailorable to your individual, if that makes sense.
That's a good segue, Jim. You're talking about duration. This one actually is directed to you. How long is the training class you do with the sim and the videos?
Again, it's going to be kind of tailored on what the individual's job responsibilities are going to be. And then after they pass that course, do they want to jump in and learn a different aspect of the company? Do they want to go from a pipe crew to heavy dirt or vice versa, right? If they've already got a lot of mechanical knowledge and they already know how to read plans and whatnot, then it's a pretty condensed course. But maybe it's a laborer from a dirt crew that wants to get into the pipe crew, start at the ground up and end up, digging with an excavator. So again, it's a tailorable course that I can set up for them, and we can kind of teach them at their pace, which is still, in my opinion, 100% faster than throwing them out in the field, where it'll take them maybe 2-3 years to ultimately get to where they want to go.
Thank you. Next one says, I'm curious about how your turnover rate has been improved with the use of the simulator versus before implementing the use of the sim.
That's a great question. It's something that we haven't really had the time to sit down and look at the metrics for, but my gut feeling is our turnover rate is probably improved. A lot of the new guys that have been through my sim and video training course, I see them and they're like, when are we going to do the next one? I'm excited to learn more. So I think we probably have a better turnover rate now. I wish I had the numbers to, tell you guys what that was. I just don't have it. And we probably eventually will see some kind of a metric system where I can track that. But gut feeling is it's absolutely improved.
Next question is there a forklift training software, not the skid steer with forks, but a standard forklift?
Absolutely. Yep. We have a forklift training pack. I encourage you to just Google it, go on our website, just look up CM Labs forklift on Google. It'll come up. Yes, we absolutely do. And it's one of our best sellers. So we're really proud of our forklift. So definitely check it out.
Yeah, I think you would be appropriate to tell all the different types of training packs that you guys have, because it's really impressive.
It's almost like too many to list, but the way that I say it now, we're at a point where it's like there's more machines, like there's fewer machines that we don't have than we do. So like think of a machine that you use, unless it's like some very niche machine, we probably have it. And even if we don't have it for whatever reason, we make custom machines all the time because it's all of our own software, all of our own physics engine. It's one of the things we do best is create custom machines. So if you have a really interesting use case, let us know. But I'd wager that, most for 98% of people here, we have the machine you're looking for.
So I'm just going to kind of jump in and help you out there. Here in the last month, we've been able to demo the construction crane set. And that's been a lot of fun. And I actually have a lot of interest from our GCs on that. And, that covers like the derrick digger, the boom truck. It's got tower cranes in it. It's got a crawler crane, an all-terrain crane. It's very relevant to the construction side of things. Super, super cool mods that you guys have for that. The other one that I'm really interested in seeing, but I've only seen videos at this point, is your Forest Service equipment. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Oh
So,
yeah.
to Alan's point, if you can think of a machine you'd like to have a sim on, they can probably build it.
Thanks, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you both. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions. There's still a couple in there in the hopper, but again, all of today's unanswered questions will be forwarded on to our speakers. But again, thank you guys so much. This was a tremendous conversation. Once again, we hope you take the time to fill out that forthcoming evaluation survey and give us your feedback. With that, we end today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. We'd like to thank Alan Limoges, Jim Ruhoff, everyone at CM Labs, and all of you who listened in. Thanks and have a great day.
My pleasure.